Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Looks like we're tackling the Hebrew month of Cheshvan today.
Uh-huh.
Might sound a little niche to some,
Right.
but with all these articles and teachings you sent, even a pronunciation guide, I have a feeling we're going to find some pretty fascinating stuff.
Oh, definitely. Cheshvan, it might not be as well known as some of the other months on Hebrew calendar,
Yeah.
but once you start digging into it, there are some really profound themes there, biblical themes.
Okay, well, I'm ready to dig. So, Cheshvan 101, where does it fall in the year, and what makes it so unique?
So Cheshvan, it's the 8th month in the Hebrew calendar. Sometimes you'll see it as Mar Cheshvan. And, well, the thing that's really interesting about Cheshvan is that it doesn't have any set feasts or fasts. Most of the other months do, but Cheshvan, it's sort of a blank slate.
A blank slate, huh? And the eighth month. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. 8. That's often connected with new beginnings, and I know from the stuff you sent over that Cheshvan is sometimes called the month of Messiah. Coincidence? I think not.
You're picking up on some key stuff. New beginnings, that's definitely a major theme in Cheshvan. And it all ties in with, with probably the most famous event connected with this month, Noah's Ark and the flood.
Now, when you say the flood, most folks just picture, like, the ark with the animals poking their heads out. But have you ever thought about the timing of all that? Like, specifically when it all went down in relation to Cheshvan?
It's definitely worth looking at. So tradition says the 10th of Cheshvan is when Noah and his fam, they enter the ark to escape the coming judgment. And then 7 days later, the 17th of Cheshvan, bam, the floodwaters start rising.
17th of Cheshvan. Okay,
Yeah.
now things are getting interesting. That date, the 17th, keeps popping up in these sources.
Right. And for good reason. See, the ark, it finally comes to rest on Mount Ararat on the 17th of Nisan.
Nisan 17th. Now, that's not just any random date. I don't want to lose our listener here, so remind us what makes Nisan 17th so significant.
Oh, sure. Nisan 17th. That's the day we associate with the resurrection of Jesus, the day of first fruits. For ancient Israelites, it marked the beginning of the barley harvest. And for Christians, it represents the first fruits of the resurrection, with Jesus being the first to rise from the dead.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful connection. The ark coming to rest on the same date that celebrates resurrection and new life. So the timing of these events, could it be pointing to a deeper link between Noah's fresh start and the new beginning offered through Jesus?
It's certainly a fascinating parallel. Both events, they represent overcoming huge challenges, right?
Yeah.
And both point to a future filled with hope and restoration.
Makes you think about the whole flood story a bit differently. And speaking of the ark, it wasn't just some random boat, was it? There's something about the Hebrew word for ark that I always found really interesting.
You're right, there is. The Hebrew word, it's Teva, which actually means a house sealed by the Spirit of God.
A house sealed by the Spirit of God. Wow, that's some powerful imagery, especially considering what was happening outside.
Exactly. The ark, it was a place of safety, of security. In the middle of all this chaos and destruction, it's almost like, a metaphor for the refuge and protection we find in Jesus.
So Noah and his family, they were physically sealed inside the ark. Kind of like how believers are spiritually sealed by the Holy Spirit.
And those floodwaters.
Yeah.
They represent the chaos and judgment of the world. They couldn't get through that seal.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But if the ark represents this kind of spiritual security, how do we square that with Cheshvan also being called the month of Messiah? I mean, Jesus already came. So why would a month all about new beginnings be linked to something that's supposed to happen in the future?
That's a good question. It might seem like a contradiction, but it actually points to a deeper understanding of what the Messiah's work is all about. Because if you look at the Gospels, there are passages where Jesus talks about his return, and he says it'll be like the days of Noah.
So it's not about, like, pinning down a date, more about being prepared, living with that expectation.
Exactly. Cheshvan, it's an invitation to live in this state of hopeful expectation, to remember that just like God brought new beginnings out of the floodwaters, he will ultimately bring about a complete and final redemption through Jesus.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, before we move on, I gotta admit something. I've been kind of struggling with how to pronounce Cheshvan. I know we've got that guide. So could you walk us through it?
Sure thing. It sounds like you've been saying it with a silent H at the beginning.
Maybe.
That's a common mistake. The right way is actually Cheshvan, with a guttural she sound, kind of like in the German word Bach.
Cheshvan. Got it. Finally, I can say it out loud without cringing. But on a slightly more serious note, we talked earlier about how each month in the Hebrew calendar is tied to one of the 12 tribes of Israel, Which tribe is connected to Cheshvan?
Cheshvan. It's associated with the tribe of Manasseh.
Mm-hmm.
And that name, well, it has some pretty deep meaning, especially in the context of this month.
Oh, and what does Manasseh mean?
It means God has made me forget.
Forget. That seems a little strange for a month that's all about new beginnings. How does forgetting fit in with everything else we've been talking about?
To really understand that, we need to look at the story of Joseph, Manasseh's father. You probably know it. Joseph, he gets betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery.
Yeah, one of the most famous stories in the Bible. Didn't really have a happy ending, though, did it?
Actually, it kind of does. You see, Joseph, he ends up in a position of power in Egypt, and then famine hits. And guess who comes looking for help?
His brothers. Talk about an awkward family reunion.
Right. But here's the thing. Joseph forgave them. He let go of all that bitterness and pain from the past. He realized God had used those tough times for something good.
So Manasseh's name, God has made me forget, it speaks to that power of forgiveness, right? Letting go of past hurts so you can embrace a new start.
That's it. And it ties in perfectly with the whole message of Cheshvan. It's a reminder that sometimes, to step into the new thing God has for us, we got to let go of what's holding us back. Past hurts, regrets, those limiting beliefs.
It sounds like we're just scratching the surface here. Cheshvan is way more than just another month on the calendar.
Oh, absolutely. We've got a lot more to explore, so much more.
Can't wait. We'll be back soon with more insights into the fascinating world of Cheshvan. Back again for more Cheshvan.
It's really cool how all these ideas, new beginnings, the ark, forgiveness, it all flows together.
Yeah, it's amazing. You can see it in how the story of Noah and the ark leads us to being sealed by the Spirit. And then Joseph, forgiving his brothers, paves the way for embracing those new possibilities, redemption, renewal. It's all connected.
Definitely. But before we get too far ahead, I want to go back to the flood for a sec, because even though it ends with a new beginning for humanity, that flood itself, that was a pretty devastating event. So how does something that destructive fit into the whole theme of renewal?
That's a great question. You're right. The flood shows God's judgment on all the wickedness and corruption that had spread throughout the world. But even within that judgment, there was grace.
God sparing Noah and his family. Exactly. And not only them, but all those animals. God making sure that life on earth would continue. It really shows God's mercy, even while carrying out righteous judgment.
So are you saying the flood is like a metaphor? For those times in our own lives when everything feels like it's falling apart, that sometimes we need to go through a metaphorical flood to get to that new beginning.
I think there's a strong parallel there. Those hard times, the trials and struggles, it can feel overwhelming, like you're drowning. But often, those are the times when we grow the most, when we change the most. Think about it. Noah and his family came out of that ark into a cleansed world, totally renewed, ready for a fresh start.
And maybe that's why Cheshvan, even though it reminds us of God's judgment, is also called the month of Messiah. It's not just about waiting for Jesus to come back. It's also about remembering he's with us right now, walking us through our own metaphorical floods, offering us refuge.
Will said, God is with us even when we feel lost and alone. He offers us hope and grace.
So we've talked about the flood, the ark, new beginnings. But what about the name Cheshvan itself? Does the meaning tie into these themes?
That's a really interesting question. The origin of the name Cheshvan, it's a little bit of a mystery, actually. Unlike some other months in the Hebrew calendar where the meaning is clear, Cheshvan's roots are kind of fuzzy.
A mystery. We have no clue where the name comes from.
Well, not completely. Some scholars think Cheshvan might be related to an old Akkadian word. It referred to a type of grain, a harvest. The Akkadians were a Mesopotamian people, and they had a big influence on the ancient Near East.
A harvest. In the month of new beginnings, it's fitting, right? Like after the flood waters receded, a new harvest could begin.
It's an interesting connection. You got to remember that the Israelites were tied to the land. Planting and harvesting, these cycles were super important to them. They connected those cycles with their faith and their understanding of God's provision.
So even if we don't know exactly what Cheshvan means, we can still get something from the symbolism. We can see how it might fit with the bigger ideas of the month.
Exactly. That's what's so cool about digging into these ancient traditions. Even if we've lost some of the specifics, there are still so many insights we can find, inspiration we can draw from the stories and symbols.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle, looking for those clues and connections, trying to get the full picture.
That's a great way to put it. And sometimes those missing pieces, the ones we don't quite understand, they just make the mystery more interesting.
Speaking of puzzle pieces, you mentioned earlier that each Hebrew month is associated with one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Which tribe goes with Cheshvan?
Cheshvan is connected to the tribe of Manasseh, which we discussed earlier. It means God has made me forget.
Right. And we talked about how that relates to Joseph forgiving his brothers, letting go of the past. But one of the articles you sent, it also mentions Manasseh being connected to digestion. That seems kind of random. How does that fit in?
It might seem random, but there's a connection. Jewish mystical teachings, they associate each tribe with a part of the body.
Okay. So for Manasseh, it's the digestive system.
Right. And think about it. Cheshvan, it comes right after the high holidays. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. There's a lot of feasting and celebration going on.
So we're entering this month of new beginnings, but our bodies are probably still trying to recover from all that holiday food.
Exactly. And that's what makes the connection to digestion so interesting. It's like Cheshvan is telling us to slow down, pay attention to our physical needs, and let our bodies process everything, the food, but also all those spiritual experiences.
So Cheshvan is like a time of spiritual detox.
I love that, a spiritual detox. It's a time to cleanse our minds and hearts, let go of what's weighing us down, and make room for all the new stuff God wants to do in us.
Like hitting the reset button. But we've been talking about Cheshvan as this month of new beginnings. But there are some pretty intense themes woven into this month, too. The flood, for example, was a huge catastrophe. And even the story of Joseph and his brothers, it's about betrayal, suffering, and loss. How do we reconcile those two seemingly opposite ideas?
You've hit on a really important point. There's a duality to Cheshvan. This tension between the promise of new beginnings and the reality of pain, the brokenness we see in life.
So how do we reconcile those things? Can we really have new beginnings if we're still dealing with the hurts and struggles of the past?
I think it comes down to grace.
Mm.
God is present even in the middle of our suffering. He's working to redeem our pain, to bring beauty from ashes. The flood, it was judgment, yes, but it also made way for a new start. And Joseph's betrayal, it led to him being raised up, and ultimately it saved his family.
So we shouldn't try to avoid the hard stuff. Sometimes those painful experiences, they're what lead us to our biggest breakthroughs.
Exactly. We need to hold both of those realities, the promise of new beginnings and the reality of suffering. They aren't separate, they're connected.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got new beginnings, grace, forgiveness, all positive themes, but in one of the articles you sent, it connects Cheshvan with the astrological sign Scorpio. And Scorpio, at least how most people think of it, has kind of a darker reputation. How does that fit into all of this?
Ah, yes, the scorpion. It's true, Scorpio doesn't have the best reputation. Danger, revenge, even death.
Not exactly warm and fuzzy.
Right. But like everything else we've talked about, there's more to it. In Jewish mysticism, Scorpio is actually a symbol of transformation.
Transformation? How so?
Think about a scorpion's life. It sheds its skin over and over again, goes through this total metamorphosis. That's powerful, right? Letting go of the old and embracing the new.
Like a snake shedding its skin, only a lot more dramatic.
Exactly. That's what I love about these old symbols. They have so many layers of meaning.
So Scorpio might seem scary at first glance, but there's this message underneath about growth and change, just like Cheshvan itself.
Exactly. It fits perfectly with the whole idea of Cheshvan as a month of new beginnings. Things that seem negative or scary can be what push us to change, to transform.
It's incredible how all of this, the flood, Joseph forgiving his brothers, the scorpion shedding its skin, it all points to letting go of the past and embracing the chance for a fresh start. We're really building towards something powerful here.
We are. And there's so much more to explore. But for now, let's take a break and then we'll wrap up our Cheshvan journey in part 3.
We're back for the final part of our Cheshvan deep dive. As we wrap up, I'm just thinking about how much symbolism and meaning is packed into this month. It's kind of amazing when you consider that Cheshvan doesn't even have any feasts or fasts.
I know, right? That's incredible how much depth there is.
Before we finish, I want to touch on one more thing, the connection between Cheshvan and the heavens.
The celestial connection. You're talking about how Jewish tradition links each month to a specific constellation?
Exactly. And for Cheshvan, that's Scorpio. We already discussed the scorpion's whole transformation thing, but I'm wondering if there's more to it than that. Like, what about what we actually see in the night sky?
There is. So Scorpio, it's a pretty prominent constellation in the fall, which, is usually when Cheshvan happens.
So it's actually visible during this time of year. That makes it even more real.
It does. And here's another cool thing. The scorpion stinger. It points right at the Milky Way galaxy. And the Milky Way, lots of ancient cultures saw it as a symbol of the divine realm.
Wow. So during Cheshvan, there's this visual link between earth and heaven,
Exactly. It's like during Cheshvan, the separation between the physical and spiritual worlds is thinner.
which makes total sense when you consider all the themes we've been unpacking: new beginnings, judgment, the promise of the Messiah. Cheshvan seems to create this space for us to be more aware of those spiritual
It
realities.
does. Maybe during Cheshvan, we're just more tuned into God's guidance and grace. Like, we can see those moments where the divine touches our everyday lives.
And it reminds us that those signs are all around, even when we're not looking. We just have to be open to seeing them.
Well said.
I feel like I understand Cheshvan so much better after this deep dive. We've covered so much. The ark as this picture of finding safety in Christ, the scorpion and transformation, the Milky Way pointing us to the divine. It all connects.
It does. We could probably talk for hours about all the details. But I guess it's time to wrap things up.
I agree. Kind of sad to see this deep dive end, though. If you had to pick one main takeaway for our listener, what would it be?
For me, the biggest takeaway is that reminder that no matter how hard things are, no matter what uncertainty we're facing, there's always the possibility of a new start.
That's so hopeful. No matter what we've been through, no matter what mistakes we've made, God always offers us the chance to begin again, just like with Noah after the flood and with Joseph and his brothers.
Exactly. And that chance isn't just for Cheshvan, it's there for us every day.
So this deep dive wasn't just about learning about this ancient Hebrew month. It was about a way of life.
Absolutely. It's about having hope, seeing God's grace in every season, and letting his love transform us.
It's been awesome exploring Cheshvan with you. Thanks so much for all your insights.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listener, thanks for joining us. We hope you found this deep dive as meaningful as we did.
Remember, even though our Cheshvan journey is ending, the journey of faith and transformation keeps going. Keep searching, keep exploring, keep growing, and may you experience the fullness of God's grace and the joy of new beginnings.